Hi guys, and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be covering Trump's latest interview with Meet the Press.
They've never seen before. So we did a great job at the border. We did a great job with the military. We did a great job with inflation. We had essentially no inflation. We had a great economy. And we didn't have an Afghanistan disaster. We were getting out, but we were going to get out with dignity and pride, not the way they got out. That was a surrender and an embarrassment and horrible. We gave $85 billion worth of equipment to the Taliban. We had death, so much death and so much horrible destruction. And it was a terrible thing. I think it was the lowest point in the history of our country. Now, with all of that, we can change it and we can make America great again. And that's why I'm doing this.
Well, and you have talked about a lot. We are going to delve into a number of issues you brought up. You talked about all the people coming across the border. Of course, a lot of families also coming across the border as well. I want to talk to you about that a little bit later on.
Yeah, a lot of families coming across the border. Just had to throw in that little zing, right? Yeah. Oh, tens of thousands of criminals. I mean, I just saw a video yesterday. It's like 1,000 middle 20-aged men walking into the country. Like, there's no children, there's no women, just like straight up men. And I'm not suggesting, they're all violent ruffians or something like that. They are, by definition, all criminals, because if they're coming in illegally, it means they've broken the law. But that's not to cast dispersions on whatever their moral character. I'm sure many are coming just to have work or whatnot. But I mean, I just think it's funny. We're going to see this over and over and over again in this interview. I'm pretty sure, oh, that's great, Mr. President. That's great. And just to remind you, here is this liberal talking point. Okay, anyway, so we're going to move on to the next question. But here we go. That's the first one. So.
But first, let's talk about the breaking news today. We learned just a short time ago that the president's son, Hunter Biden, was indicted by a federal grand jury on 3 gun charges. Given that, Mr. President, can you continue to say that there are 2 systems of justice?
Yes.
Well, I think there's no question about it. He had a plea deal that was the deal of the century, the art of the deal. You could write a book on it, the art of the deal. And all of a sudden that was broken up by a judge who was able to, a brilliant judge actually, who was able to see through what was happening. And it's a sad situation. I mean, nobody should be happy about this. I'm not happy about it. Nobody is. It's a very sad thing. It's so bad for our country. But, if you think about it, I've been under investigation from the day I came down the escalator, and a phony investigation, fake investigations that I beat every single time, still under investigations. But it's a very sad thing, and it's a slippery slope and dangerous, very dangerous for our country.
But you talked about the plea deal, but now Hunter Biden's been indicted. He's facing very serious charges. So doesn't that undercut your entire argument that there are 2 systems of justice in this country?
It's one of 12 charges. There are 12 possible charges.
And he's still under investigation.
This is the only charge that doesn't affect his father.
Well, he's still under investigation.
Well, sure, maybe. I mean, let's see what happens. But this is the only charge that doesn't affect Joe Biden. This was the gun charge. But gun charges are very serious. People have had gun charges and gone to jail for a lot of years. I pardon some people who.
Okay, I'm gonna just stop it there. So yeah, I mean, I guess her argument is because Hunter Biden was indicted on a charge, that there is therefore no difference between the way in which somebody like a Republican president like Donald Trump and a Democrat president like Joe Biden are treated in the justice system. And I think at this point, I mean, that's just patently false, right? I mean, I think most people can see there's a difference. I mean, I'm a bit biased, but her claim, he's indicted on a gun charge, so therefore he's really receiving the same justice that you're receiving, is what her that's what she's implying. In other words, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden are undergoing the same legal scrutiny that you're going with. No, I mean, that's obviously false. He brought up the fact that he was given a special plea deal, which, had it not been for this judge eliminating, he would have gotten off completely scot-free and he could never have been tried ever again, or even charged ever again with any potential crime related to his business dealings with Burisma. Which she just completely sidesteps that point. She does that all throughout this interview. So, yeah, I mean, I just think it's funny. I just think it's funny. She's like, oh, doesn't that prove that Joe Biden is facing just the exact same legal scrutiny? I mean, I think we're going to see it again and again, but she's clearly been fed the, this is what you need to talk about. This is what you need to get out into the press from the, I don't know, dark hooded figures that run our information system. But no, it's not true. He was indicted for a couple of gun charges. He's facing some very serious charges, including tax fraud. So, and he almost got away with all of it had it not been for the singular judge. And a lot of people in the government were really pissed about it. The DOJ was like livid that that judge made that ruling. So, no, it's two very different justice systems for the president and for Donald Trump. So let's keep going.
I thought it was just horrible what happened, but they were put in jail for many, many years, rappers and others. So look, it's a bad thing, but it's one of 12. And it's the one charge that doesn't affect Joe Biden.
Well, of course, there's no evidence that the
president. And of course, there's no evidence.
Business dealings. Let me ask you though.
Well, I don't necessarily agree. He called in. You mean he called in all?
And of course, there's no evidence, sir. I mean, this is just once again the line. The lines are coming out. What did I tell you? It didn't even take very long. And of course, there's no evidence that Joe Biden was ever directly involved. I mean, it's just, I think I have that line at this point tattooed on the back of my brain. It's in my nightmares. And of course, there's no evidence that Joe Biden was ever directly involved with his son's foreign business dealings. I mean, I guess here's the question that we'll be asking throughout the interview, I'm sure. How stupid these people must think the American public is that they wouldn't notice all the news anchors saying the exact same words, not similar language, the exact same language. And of course, there's no evidence that Joe Biden was ever directly involved with his son's foreign business deal. I mean, it's verbatim what is repeated over and over and over again. And as I've demonstrated, I'm going to have to write a piece on this. Actually, that's what's going to have to happen. I'm just going to have to write in hard copy all the evidence that is very suggestive and in some cases absolutely declarative that Joe Biden was directly involved with Hunter Biden's business dealings when he was the vice president of the United States. But I've already covered it multiple times on my show. I mean, it's not difficult to find. JustTheNews.org is a perfectly fine website for you to go to that frequently runs the story of how Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden's business dealings. So this is just fake. I mean, everybody I think knows this. I mean, even the liberals are like, oh, of course he was involved. It just doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. He's still a better president than Donald Trump. And that's fine. I mean, if you believe that, at least be honest about it. Yeah, he was involved. He's completely corrupt. It's the greatest corruption scandal probably in American history, certainly of the last half a century. But, whatever. If you think Trump is an evil Nazi and an incompetent nincompoop that's going to blow us up, even though he never started a war, and Joe Biden has gotten us literally closer to World War III than ever before, then that's your prerogative. You're more than free to do that. But don't parrot this lie that there's no evidence that Joe Biden was. Okay, we have 5,400 emails. 5,400. This is a fact. Okay, this is not disputable. We have 5,400 emails that were sent from Joe Biden. This is, again, a fact. That little funny word called fact. From Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's business partners. 5,400 under a pseudonym, which he hid in an obscure department of the federal government. Okay? We don't know that every single one of these emails was sent to one of Hunter Biden's business partners. Okay? Fair enough. But that's only because we haven't seen what these emails hold. We've barely been told they're around, and that was only because of a leak. But we know they're there, 5,400, and we know a great many of them are directly sent from Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's business partners at Burisma, for example. His business partners in China, for example. So that right there is evidence. Okay. By the way, the testimony of Hunter Biden's main business partner is evidence. It's evidence. I don't know what definition of evidence apparently all the liberal talking heads in the mainstream media use, but by any normal person's definition of evidence, the testimony, the sworn under oath testimony of Hunter Biden's main business partner, Devin Archer, when he said Joe Biden was directly involved with our business dealings, that is evidence, okay? That's evidence, and he testified before Congress. So maybe he's lying, maybe it's not true, but there's still evidence for it. So I think if you're going to play this game and you're going to be smart about it, you should just say, of course, it's not true. All the evidence is fake or false or misinformation or something. I mean, you'd think they'd go that route, but no, they're still just blatantly denying the existence of evidence. There is mountains of evidence that Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden. It's almost undeniable unless you were so, I don't know, inculcated in the liberal media, mainstream media's machine that you couldn't possibly have the free will to decide for yourself that Joe Biden is involved. So let's go back.
All these meetings, he was calling in on the meetings. He was put on speakerphone, and every single day.
There's another piece of
literally.
Again, that's from Devin
calls,
Archer's testimony.
And what about the fact that he got rid of the prosecutor for $1 billion?
Well,
Yep, that's another one. So Joe Biden declared on national television for everybody. Anybody can go YouTube it right now. On national television, it said he got the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma, where the company where his son was on the board, and which the testimony, by the way, of a confidential FBI informant, another piece of evidence, the testimony before Congress of a confidential FBI informant said that the head of Burisma Energy, I think his name is Zolchevsky, or Zenchevsky, it was one of those two, Mykola Zolchevsky, I believe, was the CEO of Burisma. He claimed, he said to this FBI informant that he had paid Joe Biden, okay, that's Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden, not Devin Archer, Joe Biden, Joseph Biden, $5 million to get that prosecutor fired. He told that FBI informant that months before, in the same year, as vice president of the United States, Joe Biden, Joseph Biden, got that prosecutor fired, who was investigating Burisma Energy for corruption. And then he went on national television and told the whole world how he fired that prosecutor. How did he do it? Well, he went to the president of Ukraine at the time and said, listen, I'm going to withhold $1 billion of aid unless you fire this prosecutor, which is, by definition, quid pro quo. So we should impeach him right away. Republicans have always had the grounds to impeach Joe Biden because he made a quid pro quo call to Ukraine when he was vice president of the United States, and he never faced justice for it. So Republicans, if they were any good at the political game, even half as good as Democrats, which they're not, they're horrible and incompetent. But if they were, they already have grounds for impeachment. And it doesn't matter if you're going to win or not. You just create chaos, right? Because that's the war you're fighting if you're a senator or a congressman in Washington, D.C., right? So he called the president of Ukraine. He said, I'm going to withhold $1 billion unless you fire the prosecutor. They fired the prosecutor, and then he went on national television and bragged about it. So again, there's some evidence that Joe Biden was directly involved in Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings.
You don't get rid of this prosecutor. We're not giving you $1 billion to Ukraine. He said that. I mean, there are a lot of things here.
Mr. President, the witness who testified, though, said that he never heard any discussion of business when President Biden was put on the phone.
Wait. You saw the prosecutor thing on television, because I saw it on your network. He said You don't get rid of this prosecutor, I'm not giving $1 billion.
That was looked into as well. And as you know, there was
Oh,
never
come on.
any wrongdoing.
If I,
I don't even know what she's referring to. I mean, that was looked into as well. That was looked into as well. And as you know, Mr. President, there was no wrongdoing. There was no evidence of wrongdoing. Yeah, I mean, it's an insinuation that he's lying. I mean, she's very subtly insinuating that, which I mean, nobody needs any special reason to believe Donald Trump is a liar. Okay, like of course he's a liar. He's a politician. He's definitely capable of lying. But the insinuation here is, you know that is disinformation, Mr. President. You know that's not true, and that's not true. I mean, he doesn't know because nobody knows, because it just isn't the case that somebody investigated that and determined, oh yeah, on the basis of this objective evidence, Joe Biden did nothing wrong. I mean, it's obviously a quid pro quo. It's obviously a quid pro quo. I mean, there's not even an investigation that needs to happen. It's prima facie a quid pro quo. He said, you do this, I will give this to you, but you must give this personal interest of mine something as well. And by the way, he did that in the same year that Mykola Zlochevsky, the head of Burisma Energy, is testifying, or at least informing a confidential FBI agent, a federal agent of the law, that he paid Joe Biden $5 million to do that. So, anyways.
I ever said that. Quid pro quo.
Let's move on to what a second Trump term would look like.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
When you launched your campaign in March, you told the crowd, quote, I am your retribution. What does that mean? What does that look like?
I think retribution is talking in terms of I have to protect people. What they're doing to people is so horrible. They're putting people in jail for long periods of time. Firemen, policemen, accountants, even lawyers. They're in prisons for years now and don't even have trials in some cases. And if you look at Antifa and other groups, practically nothing happened to them. They burned down Portland. They burned down Minneapolis. They took over Seattle. I mean, they literally took over a big chunk of the city. People died and nothing happened to them. We have to protect all people.
But when you talk about retribution, are you talking about directing your attorney general to try to go after your political enemies?
When I talk about retribution, I'm talking about fairness. We have to treat people fairly. These people.
Okay, well, first of all, he just defined what. So she just asked him, what did you mean by retribution? And then he was like, well, I mean, protecting people. I mean, January 6th. I mean, he's talking about January 6th here. They're throwing people in jail. They're throwing people in jail for being pro-life. They're throwing people in jail for being Catholic. They're investigating them. I mean, these are his claims. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying all of them are true. This is what he's saying, right? This is what I mean by retribution. And then she goes, but by retribution, do you mean prosecuting and persecuting your political enemies? Do you mean by retribution to hire an attorney general who will go out there and shoot Democrats in the streets like the dogs they are? Is that what you're trying to insinuate, Mr. President? I mean, it's just like, and then he's like, no, I mean what I just said. I mean, pardoning people from unjust, criminal persecutions, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, wow, she's not even really doing a great job of hiding it. She's just
on January 6th, some of them never even went into the building, and they're being given sentences of many years.
Are you going to pardon
and nothing
those
is happening? Well, I'm going to look at them, and I certainly might if I think it's appropriate. No, it's a very, very sad thing.
Perfectly reasonable answer.
They're dividing the country so badly, and it's very dangerous.
Well, Mr. President, we're going to delve into that a little bit later on, but I want to stay on this
idea
of what you mean by retribution. Are you looking to appoint an attorney general who will prosecute the people you tell them to prosecute?
I'm looking to appoint an attorney.
Okay, well, first of all, to some extent, that's what any president does. They appoint an attorney general who really then under his own purview decides who he prosecutes or whatever. But again, this is just objection asked and answered at this point. She's and by retribution, do you mean that you'll be a bloodthirsty Hitler-esque monster? Is that what you mean, Mr. President? that you're going to be Hitler and Stalin. I mean, that's clear. I mean, she's goading him into like and you mean by retribution that you're going to go after Democrats so that her company and all the other mainstream media companies can run the story that Donald Trump says he's retribution, and that means he's going after Democrats with unjust, bloodthirsty, Hitler-esque prosecutions, legal prosecutions, which is, by the way, exactly what we're living under right now with Joe Biden. So,
Attorney General who's going to be tough on crime and fair. Very simple.
And go after your political enemies?
No, I would never do that. But Biden has done that. Look, Biden, these aren't indictments against me. These are Biden indictments. This isn't.
What I mean by retribution is be very fair and be legal and free and very fair and go after your political enemies. No, just be very fair and legal and free and go after your political enemies. Isn't that what you mean? No, just be very fair and defend and go after your political. I mean, it's just
God coming down and very fairly said, Joe, you spoke badly about an election. The election was rigged. There's no question about that. There's so much proof on it. Even if you go to the more modern day proof with the they call it Twitter files, FBI and Twitter, or you take a look at the Amazon stuff,
I'm sure
or the
she's going to
Google
love
stuff,
this.
or you take a look at 2,000 Mules, you take a look at all of the ballot stuffing that's on tape. You take a look at the fact that the legislatures didn't approve a lot of the things that were done in the elections, and they had to approve. And we could go on forever. We could go on forever. But no, I want somebody that's going to be strong, respected, tough, and fair. We have to get the energy down, which they will never do. And they kept it artificial because they took the strategic reserves, which I had a lot to do with filling up for the first time ever. They took the strategic reserves and he issued it to everybody so that he could keep the gas prices down. Now, strategic reserves are at the lowest level they've ever been at. And we need that for war.
And there are a lot of factors that have contributed to
Well, no, the big factor is the fact that he took that oil.
Let's talk
He
about
took that and he wanted to have low gas prices.
And it's not Joe
for an
Biden's
election.
fault.
And now we have nothing left.
Mr. President, there are a lot of factors, including global factors, that went into that. Let's talk about taxes,
I
though.
don't know why people stick up for him so much when he makes.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, he's about to make a great point. I mean, it's just like, it's just so obvious. I mean, how arrogant do you have to be? How arrogant do you have to be to think that the American people listening to you are so galactically stupid that they can't see right through what you're doing? Mr. President, there were a lot of, including global factors. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? She doesn't even have an argument for why, inflation isn't Joe Biden's fault. At least some, liberal economists actually have an argument, like supply chain shocks as part of a theory of cost push inflation, right? But she doesn't even, she's just like, there are a lot of factors that is clearly not Joe Biden's fault. Anyways, let's move on to the next. I mean, it's so obvious what she does. It's incredible how just absolutely stupendously arrogant these people are. And Mr. President, there are a lot of factors. Anyway, she doesn't even take a breath before she's trying to change the subject so that he can't argue with her. I mean, if you're going to say something like that, it's an argument. You're not interviewing somebody anymore. You're arguing for a position. I feel like that's fair, right? I mean, if you're going to make a point like that, you're not interviewing Donald Trump anymore. You are debating Donald Trump. You are arguing for and in place of Joe Biden because he's too mentally incompetent to do it himself. So you are basically hosting a debate right now on behalf of Joe Biden with Donald Trump. So you can't just be like, anyways, and here's just assertion without evidence that you're wrong. Here's my assertion without evidence that you're wrong. And I'm going to move on to the next question before you can say something. I mean, this is a man running for the president of the United States. He's the front runner in the Republican Party by a billion-mile margin. And you're not going to let him respond to it. I mean, I'm not even like the world's biggest fan of Donald Trump, not by a long shot. But it's like, I mean, if I was going to bring Joe Biden himself on the show, I would do one of two things. I would either say, listen, when you get on the show, I'm going to do everything I can to rip you to shreds. So you better come ready with your talking points. But he would never do that show, of course, but he wouldn't do my show anyways. But if I told him I was going to interview him, I wouldn't argue. I'd just be like, what about this? What's your answer for that? I mean, if she really thinks there are global factors, why didn't she say, well, what about the supply chain shocks, Mr. President? How does that, how has that affected the strategic oil reserves? I mean, I get it. Yeah, she's got only so much time, blah, blah, blah. Not really. I mean, she can interview this guy for like 3 hours probably, and then she's going to cut it up into 60 minutes. So this is just disgraceful. I think I would be embarrassed. I would be embarrassed to be this interviewer.
Bad decisions like you.
Mr.
I don't know why, and I have a lot of respect for you, and you were very fair in the debate, but I don't know why you and other people say, oh, it's okay that he destroyed the strategic petroleum reserves. I mean, why do you do that? Or it's okay that he has open borders.
Mr.
Somebody
President,
was in your position, not quite as good, said this morning, oh, having open borders is a wonderful thing. I don't know why, and I think that's why the media has lost so much
Mr.
credibility.
President, we're just having a conversation.
No, you're not having a conversation.
Taxes and your differences with President Biden over taxes.
Sure.
He wants to raise corporate tax rates to 28%. It's reported you want to lower them to 15%. Is that true?
I'd like to lower them a little bit if we could, but what I want to do is we have to get some income coming in. When I lowered taxes, we took in more revenue.
To 15%, Mr.
You know that
President?
It depends on where we are at the time. A lot happens in a year. But when I lowered taxes, I cut taxes tremendously.
I mean, you can tell she's fishing for like article titles. That's basically been this whole interview. It's been debating on behalf of Joe Biden and getting Donald Trump to say things. I mean, she's literally like, and isn't your retribution this? Just agree to this definition that I'm giving you of your political retribution so that I can go and write, so that my team can go and write a piece about how you're going to go persecute your political enemies or something. I mean, she's just spoon feeding him these things so that they can go write hit pieces for the next year.
Tremendously, create a tremendous job. So more importantly, we had more revenue with lower taxes than we did with higher taxes.
You also added $8 trillion to the national debt. Your GOP challenger, Nikki Haley, made that point saying, quote, the truth is that Biden didn't do this to us. Republicans did this to us.
Okay, that's very true. I've said that all along. I mean, I said that when Trump was still president. I think it's the biggest. This is the problem with everyday average Republicans. I mean, they're not interested in policy. They're basically just like liberals in the sense that they look at their political figures as exactly that, figures instead of packages of policies. I mean, Donald Trump was horrible on monetary policy. And the initial wave of inflation, in my opinion, was undoubtedly caused by Trump. Not to mention that he shut down the economy. I mean, there's lots of things to be critical about in the Trump economy. So she's right about that. He spent more money than Obama by far. And no conservatives talk about that. Nobody, I never hear that from Republicans about how, we were all up in arms when Obama wanted to do $1 trillion stimulus package. I mean, Trump's presidency made the $1 trillion stimulus package look like child's play. Of course, now Joe Biden's already spent far more than Trump did in his entire presidency, and he did that in the first 2 years. So, it's a double-edged sword, but she's absolutely right. I've always said that. He was horrible on monetary and fiscal policy.
Does she have a point?
We had a thing happen to us. We had the greatest economy in history, and then we got hit with COVID. And we had to keep this beautiful thing going. And if I didn't do that, if we didn't put some money in, nobody knew what COVID was. Remember, this was a new thing that came in. Somebody said it's dust coming in from China. It came.
Okay, I'm not even sure what he's talking about there, but that's not true. And also, the stimulus wasn't needed. All that was needed was not shutting the economy down, giving people the freedom to choose for themselves what was going to happen. Okay, and it doesn't matter. You can't. I mean, what's hilarious is that he has Arthur Laffer and these sorts of guys were originally his economic advisors at the start of his presidency. It's why, for example, he got more tax revenue in with lower taxes, because that's the whole Laffer curve principle, et cetera, whether or not you think there should be any taxes like that at all is a separate policy issue. But at any rate, the whole premise that the government can stimulate the economy by pumping money into it, it's just false. It's not true. Obviously, it's debate and economics. I'm totally unconvinced of the Keynesian position that it works. All it does, in my opinion, is create inflation. It doesn't create real wealth. It works for the short term, absolutely, but then you just get caught in the cycle of always having to do it. Because once prices adjust, once the new created money gets pumped into the economy, and that initial boost in GDP realizes the economic activity that gave you that initial boost in GDP, once those actors realize that prices are rising, right? That the real reason new business is coming in the door isn't because people have real wealth, it's because the government gave them a stimulus check. Well, then prices go up and inflation adjusts for the new money level. So the new supply of money creates a new price level. And then we're right back to where the situation was anyways, with real people dealing with real resources to create real wealth, and the government and their stimulus, spending or whatever didn't really do anything at all. Now, you might have an argument in a case like this where it's like, hey, there's a really time-sensitive crisis that the government can kind of trick people into for a time, thinking that the economy is fine, and then once the real causes of the real shock dissipate in the long run, then inflation could go up because we'll be at a stronger place to handle that shock. And again, those are debates that economists have. I don't buy those arguments, but at any rate, he's wrong about it in principle.
Ukraine. But first, I do want to talk about the issue of abortion, which is important to a lot of voters all across the country. Just this week, women in Idaho and Tennessee, I don't know if you saw this, filed suit against their state saying their lives were put at risk after they were denied abortion services because their state's restrictive laws put in place after Roe was overturned. So my question for you, Mr. President, is how is it acceptable in America that women's lives are at risk, doctors are being forced to turn away patients in need, or risk breaking the law?
Ready? A little bit of a long answer. I hope you have time.
I hope you have time. Okay. I'm here for as long as you have.
Roe v. Wade. For 52 years, people, including Democrats, wanted it to go back to states so that states could make the right. Roe v. Wade, I did something that nobody thought was possible, and Roe v. Wade was terminated, was put back to the states. Now, people, pro-lifers, have the right to negotiate for the first time. They had no rights at all, because the radical people on this are really the people, the Democrats, that say after 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, and even after birth, you're allowed to terminate the baby.
Democrats aren't saying that. I just have to. Democrats are not saying that.
Of course
That's
they do.
Not true.
You have a Virginia governor, previous governor, who said after the baby is born, you will make a determination, and if you want, you will kill that baby. The baby is now born.
Democrats writ large are not talking about that. Only 1% of late-term abortions happen in always in the state of
They
crisis.
are the radical people, because nobody wants to see abortion after 5 months and 6.
Look, his answer is terrible, actually, anyways. Doesn't matter, because what she really asked was, how can we do this? How can we put women's lives at risk? Okay, listen, I want to be sensitive about this because, listen, I get it. Women out there, I'm sure there are women at risk, or I'm sure there are very difficult situations for people who are having almost always out of wedlock pregnancies, right? That is a situation I will never experience. I'm a man. I'm a happily married man. I live a beautiful life with a beautiful family. So I recognize that the emotions run high on this issue. But what she's asking is a principally philosophical question. Just this morning, it's Friday the 22nd, just this morning, I released an essay on my Substack. I made it free for everybody to go and read, which is The Philosophy of Abortion, The Ethics of Abortion. The short answer to her question is just simply, don't even get into the details. The short answer to her question, how can we do this? How can we say we're going to put women's lives at risk and doctors have to turn away patients, etc.? Okay, the answer is actually quite short. It's not long. Because it's murder. Because it is homicide. Because if a human being begins to exist at conception, then abortion is killing a human being. And unless there is a moral justification to do so, it's murder. All right? That's how. And that's a debate. That's a debate. I'm not saying that's not an argument. I'm just saying that's how. That is how you do it. Because if a human being comes into existence at the moment of conception, then it doesn't matter. There's not necessarily any justification to let somebody else willy-nilly murder a human being. So just because you're putting somebody at whatever, I mean, let's just assume she's right and women are at risk. An assumption that is easily challenged. But let's just assume, okay, but to say that somebody can kill someone else because their health is at risk, that's a pretty morally loose claim. I don't think most people would agree with that. And at any rate, you'd have to argue for it. In other words, if the mother's health is moderately or mildly or even potentially severely at risk due to a pregnancy, does that justify murder? I think most people would say, no, it doesn't. Now, it might. There might be moral justification for allowing the life to die. It wouldn't be murder at that point, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can justify killing another human being, right? I mean, the state kills human beings. Most people don't feel like that's murder. You may disagree. Those are debates. But that's how you do it. That's the short answer. That's the short answer. Because the fundamental question in the abortion debate isn't, what constitutes a woman's right to health care, blah, blah, blah. And it isn't about doctors turning away patients. I mean, these are non-issues. These are just images that she's conjuring up to make it seem like liberals have the moral high ground in this debate, and they don't. The fundamental question, the essential question in the abortion debate is, when does a human being begin to exist? And I think we have very good reason to believe that human beings begin to exist at conception. The overwhelming scientific consensus is that biological life begins at conception, that there is a radical discontinuity between the sex gametes of the father and mother of a human embryo and the embryo itself. The zygote that is the fertilized egg is radically different and discontinuous from the two gametes that formed the zygote. And the two gametes that formed the zygote precisely cease to exist at the moment of conception, when a being comes into existence with 46 chromosomes that did not exist before. Okay, and in order to argue that there be that the zygote, that the human embryo is a different kind of organism than an adult human, means you have to posit somewhere along that line it became a human. Somewhere along from conception to birth, presumably sometime before birth, that embryo underwent some substantial change, which transformed it into a human. And I don't see any good basis to believe that that is the case. Where is the evidence that a zygote undergoes some massive substantial change? So that would be the debate. And the point is, half of this country, more than half of this country, believes that birth or life begins at conception. And so if life begins at conception, then abortion is, at least in many, many cases, perhaps the vast majority of cases, homicide. Homicide. So that's how we could say it. You cannot morally justify the killing of another human being just because a woman is poor. I'm sorry. It's tragic that she is in that situation. It's tragic that she got pregnant outside of marriage. It's tragic that she got pregnant without having somebody there to help her financially and emotionally and morally support the child. But there are other options for her. And we should have other options for her. And we should do everything possible to have a robust social system, not from the government, to help people who are experiencing the horrors of an unplanned pregnancy. This is not an anti-woman thing. It's a pro-human thing. It's a pro-life thing. Unfortunately, being poor or being stressed or being scared does not give you the right to kill a human being, however small the human being may be. So that's how we do it. And his answer is oddly more long and complicated.
6 months and 7 months. And now it gave people that believe in pro-life, look, just so you understand, it's pretty much 50-50. It's a 50-50 issue. Amazing. If you look at the charts, it's been 49-51. It's been like that for many years, goes both ways, 51, both ways. Ready? I was able to do something which gave at least pro-life people a voice. Now it's going to work out. Now the number of months will be determined.
Can you
and you're
answer
going to have
this
something
question?
where everybody comes
Does
together.
it bother you, though, that women say their lives are being put at risk? Do you feel you bear any responsibility?
No, it doesn't bother me at all. And the assumption in your question is that, first of all, their lives are at risk, which I think is very doubtable. Where are these women whose lives are at risk by normal pregnancies, right? If we're talking about, like, I think it's called an ectopic pregnancy and etc., where, you know, the mother's life is very much at risk. That's actually not a conception. It's actually not. They have to surgically remove a failed conception, a failed pregnancy. And again, that's an extremely rare case, right? The cases of women being threatened, like long before birth, right? Being threatened at an early stage of pregnancy or something, like they have some serious health problem. Those are very rare. And many people are willing to concede ground to say we have moral justification for the ending of a human life, which would not be homicide, because we are also saving another one, right? And that's a further debate. That's a further debate for people to have. It would be akin to somebody saying, I'm going to shoot, you know, a guy that's breaking into my house to hurt my family, right? I'm saving the lives of other people by killing this life. And that may be a morally justified thing, but by and large, that's not what's going on. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that her risk, that just being put at risk, mildly or moderately, is moral justification for killing another human being. And of course, implicit in that for this lady is that it's not a human being. So, I mean, she's assuming all kinds of things with this kind of line of questioning. And if Trump were more philosophically informed and an actual conservative, then he would be telling her that.
Because, as you say, you are responsible.
What's going to happen, this is an issue that's been going on for a long time, and it's a very polarizing issue. Because of what's been done, and because of the fact we brought it back to the states, we're going to have people come together on this issue. They're going to determine the time, because nobody wants to see 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. Nobody wants to see abortions when you have a baby in the womb. I said, with Hillary Clinton, when we had the debate, I made a statement: rip the baby out of the womb in the 9th month. You're allowed to do that, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Again, no one is arguing for that. That's not a part of anyone's.
People are arguing for that.
The Democrats are able to kill the baby after birth.
Let me talk to you.
You know, there's this hilarious thing. I mean, like sort of like internet infidel atheists use it all the time. It's called Hitchens' razor, which is whatever is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And I love it. I actually use it against liberals and atheists all the time. You know, it's like, it's kind of funny, but yeah, this is it. It's a perfect application. I mean, what is asserted without evidence can simply be dismissed without evidence. She's claiming nobody argues for that. That's patently false. Doesn't take much more than 30 seconds of internet research to figure out that lots of people, actually, political people with power, are arguing that you should be able to have late-term abortions. And there are still people arguing for afterbirth abortions, for infanticide. Okay, this is not. Again, I wrote an essay this morning about the question: is a human embryo a human person? Is it a fully realized human being? And I cited multiple works in that space. One book in particular, The Ethics of Abortion, deals with the question of infanticide. There are lots of people. There are lots of mainstream academic philosophers that argue for the moral justification of killing newborn babies. So she's just patently wrong.
Nobody wants that.
That Democrats don't want that.
So
either.
we're going to come together.
I want to know what.
Yes, they do.
I want to know what you're going to do if you're.
We are going to come
together. Would you sign
together.
federal legislation that would ban abortion at 15 weeks?
No. Let me just tell you what I do. I'm going to come together with all groups, and we're going to have something that's acceptable. Right now, to my way of thinking, the Democrats are the radicals, because after 4 and 5 and 6 months, but you have to say this. After birth, you have New York State and other places that pass legislation where you're allowed to kill the baby after birth.
Mr. President, I want to give voters who are going to be weighing in on this election,
Yeah.
a very clear sense of where
I think
you stand
I
on
think
this.
they're all going to like me. I think both sides are going to like me.
Let me, but let
What's
Mr.
going to
President,
have to
Mr.
happen
President,
is you're
let me
going to
just
have to
ask this question,
listen.
please.
You're asking me a question. What's going to happen is you're going to come up with a number of weeks or months. You're going to come up with a number that's going to make people happy, because 92% of the Democrats don't want to see abortion after a certain period of time.
If a federal ban landed on your desk, if you were reelected, would you sign it at 15
Are you
weeks?
talking about a complete ban?
A ban at 15 weeks?
Well, people are starting to think of 15 weeks. That seems to be a number that people are talking about right now.
Would you sign that?
I would sit down with both sides and I'd negotiate something, and we'll end up with peace on that issue for the first time in 52 years. I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't. I mean, DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that
I
goes
think what
too
he
far?
did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake. But we'll come up with a number.
Okay. Actually, let's.
But at the same time, Democrats won't be able to go out in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months and allow an abortion. And Kristen, you have to look at this because you said no. You have some states that are allowed to kill the child after birth, and you can't allow that.
But Mr. President, again, no one is calling for a child to be killed after birth. No one's calling
Just
for that
before
to
birth.
be allowed.
Legislation.
But let me just ask you
Kristen,
this.
We're just calling for children to be killed before we can see them physically in the naked eye. That, if it's 7 months in and the baby is basically viable, that's fine. We're going to kill it. It's got neural activity. It's got a heartbeat. It's basically a fully realized human person from even my conception. And that's fine. We're going to kill that. But once it's out of the birth canal, then suddenly it's been endowed with basic human moral dignity. Okay. Again, this is the problem. This is where you have to go. Does a human embryo constitute a fully realized human being? If your answer is yes, then abortion is in most cases going to be murder, homicide, infanticide. Okay? You're killing a human being. You're killing a being which is in the process, in its first stage of development. It's really, in principle, no different from killing a newborn baby or killing a 90-year-old man. They're in different stages of development. So if you're going to argue that human being at stage 1 of its development does not have the same basic moral dignity as a man in his 90s, then you have to make an argument for what is the basis of personhood. What is the basis from which we get our basic moral worth as human beings, the rights that we appeal to in this country, that were enshrined in the Constitution? Because the Declaration of Independence states that those were enshrined by virtue of being created, by virtue of our creative origin. We have inalienable rights which come from God. They're not concessions made to us by the state. They're not given to us by our social class. They are inalienable parts of being a human being. It's part of human nature to have a right to life, to have basic moral dignity and worth. And if you're going to make the argument that a fetus inside the womb, which is a human person or a human being, does not get that basic moral worth, then you must argue for what is the basis of human worth or moral worth. And if you're not going to make that argument, then you have to make an argument for why the fetus inside the womb is not a human being. And there's just no evidence for that. It's an inescapable conclusion. There is no non-arbitrary line for which somebody could say, yep, that's what it is. It's 12 weeks or whatever. That's when personhood begins. The reality is that all the biological evidence suggests that the zygote from the moment of conception is a whole, self-actualizing, self-integrated organism that is at stage 1 of its development. And it will continue to grow all the way through human maturity. Yeah, I mean, Trump is not unsurprisingly, or is not surprisingly, wishy-washy here about abortion. I think he's always been, some people reached out to me about the interview and they were, I guess, surprised that Trump was so wishy-washy. I mean, he's always been. I don't know where people got the idea that he's like a really strong guy on the abortion issue. It's really not. He even kind of contradicts himself here. I don't know why he's playing this game. He should just stick to the states' rights issue. In other words, according to Trump's own statements, which he made in this interview, if he got a 15-week ban, of course he would veto it. That's what I would be saying if I was trying. Oh, of course I'm going to veto it because it's not a federal issue. It's not a federal issue. Let the states write their own laws. We don't need every law to be a federal one. We've completely forgotten that states have governments. They can write their own laws. And if people want abortion in Washington and sacrifice children and murder infants, they can do that. We're not going to have it here in Arizona, right? Like, let the states make their own laws. That's what he should have said in this interview. And instead he said something like, oh, I'd sit down and I'd negotiate. I'd have negotiations with everyone and I'd come up with the best deal, the best plan for abortion. We'd come up with it. I don't know why. He just said it was a states' right issue. So let's keep it that way. I'm fine with that answer. And then the worst thing that he said was that what DeSantis did in Florida was a terrible thing. Oh, I think you're wrong. Clearly, Donald Trump is wrong on that issue. I don't think it's a terrible thing to protect humans who are 6 weeks old. In reality, they're 6 weeks old. They're in stage 1 of their development. So, again, I think even most sort of hardline pro-lifers, I'm not really one of them, just to be honest, but just to be as neutral as possible about the politics of abortion, I think most hardline pro-lifers would concede, they would happily concede that there can be extreme medical cases where the termination of a pregnancy is legal, right? Almost always they're not called abortions, by the way. They're called like ectopic surgeries or something like that. They're not called abortions because they're not, in almost all cases, they're not conceived children. They're not actually human beings. There isn't actually a fertilized egg that's developing into a human being. It's a failed conception. But at any rate, I think most hardline pro-lifers would be willing to concede that in those kinds of extreme medical cases, women should have the moral justification to end the pregnancy, right? I think a lot of pro-lifers would be for that position in exchange for outlawing every other possible abortion. And I think we'd see that the number of abortions would go from where it is today to 99.99% less than what it is today. Because the fact is that the vast majority of abortions have nothing to do with health. So that's fine. We can just take that off the table. Again, if I was a politician like Trump arguing for something like that, I would just say, yeah, absolutely. Any sort of health, yeah, we'd write an amazing bill. Cindy, I can't really remember what her name is, Cindy or something. We'd write an amazing bill. It'd be the best bill ever on ever. And we take it right out. We take right out the medical emergency thing. Anybody who's got one can have an abortion, blah, blah, blah. But then Cindy, you gotta go the other way. Okay. And we have to have no abortions 7, 8, 9 months after the baby's born. That's gotta go. That's gotta be out of here. That's what he should have said. It's a state rights issue, and women who, have serious medical conditions can continue to have abortion. I think that'd be an incredible concession to pro-life movement right now, which is exactly why nobody's offering it. Because the fact of the matter is the pro-life movement isn't so powerful that it's kicking women at risk to the curb and turning away patients and locking up children. It's not doing any of that stuff. There's not enough influence in society right now by the pro-life movement to be doing any of that stuff. So that's why they're not offering that concession, because pro-lifers happily take it. Sure, we'll allow medically necessary abortions defined by lawmakers over the next however many months. We will allow that if you would concede that there are no other abortions. In other words, no casual abortions, no convenience abortions. Everybody else has to have the baby. And of course, nobody's going to offer that, because that would be destroying the entire abortion market, because the entire abortion market is based on convenience abortions. It's not based on health.
Legislation in certain states where it's allowed.
Mr. President.
The governor of Virginia, previous governor, who was a whack job. I call him the Michael Jackson governor.
Previous governor. So it never happened.
I want to know what
that never said you can kill the baby after birth.
But Mr. President, this is about what you would do if you were reelected. As you know, you have said
we will agree to a number of weeks, which will be where both sides will be happy. We have to bring the country.
That's called gaslighting, by the way. No, it's about contradicting what you just said. You just made a claim. He just offered a piece of counter evidence to your claim, and then you go, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about here. That's called gaslighting.
Together on this issue.
Mr. President, when you talk about negotiating, I think a lot of people think to themselves, this is an issue that they care about deeply in their hearts. They know where they stand, and they want to know where you stand. As you know, some anti-abortion groups are really looking for some clarity from you. So let me just ask you to put a fine point on this. Should the federal government impose any abortion restrictions, or should it be completely left up to the states?
No, I don't think you should be allowed to have abortions well into a pregnancy.
But what about the question I just asked
you? No, we're going to agree to a number of weeks or months or however you want to define it. And both sides are going to come together, and both sides, and this is a big statement, both sides will come together, and for the first time in 52 years, you'll have an issue that we can put behind us.
At the federal level?
It could be state or it could be federal. I don't frankly care.
Your former Vice President Mike Pence believes that a fetus should have constitutional rights. Do you believe that, Mr. President?
Mike Pence said something about 15 weeks, too, which was a big change for Mike Pence because Mike Pence had no exceptions. I have exceptions, by the way. I think people should have exceptions. I think if it's rape or incest or the life of the mother, I think you have to have exceptions.
Does a fetus have constitutional rights, Mr.
And a lot of people, when they don't have exceptions. Now, I will tell you that I think most people, most Republicans.
Okay, let's just stop right there real fast and address that. So again, the question is a human embryo a human being? And is a human being a human person? In other words, I assume this in the essay that I wrote that I published, but again, this is something that is debated, okay? And particularly by liberals, despite what so-and-so says here. But the question is, are all human beings human persons? In other words, does being a member of the race, of the species, Homo sapien, does that confer to you the basic moral dignity that most of us believe human persons have in general? And I think most people believe, yeah, it does. Like, in other words, by being a member of the human race, you have inherent moral dignity and worth. Okay, to deny that in any way, I think sends most people down the slippery slope to Nazism. And what's funny is that the people that are most likely to deny that are going to be progressive liberals. It's so funny how they do that, huh? That they call everybody else Nazis and, oh, you Nazi, blah, 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 blah. But then they'll be the first one to be like, well, I'm not so sure everybody has moral worth. Donald Trump certainly doesn't. We should, take him out, beat him into the streets. So, that's the irony. But assuming most everybody agrees that any human being is a human person, then the real question is a human embryo a human being? In other words, is the fetus a member of the species Homo sapiens? Is it biologically the same organism as any human adult? And the answer is clearly yes. From the scientific evidence to the philosophical evidence, there's no philosophically non-arbitrary line to draw where you say, no, this is when it became from this organism to this organism. There's no line. And from the scientific evidence, there's no evidence whatsoever that the zygote undergoes any additional significant change. Nothing comes into the embryo. Nothing comes through the umbilical cord or something like this from the mother's body that changes biochemically the organization of the already actually whole organism that the zygote is. So the answer is clearly yes. A zygote, a fetus, is a member of the species Homo sapiens. It is biologically the same organism as you or I. Okay? And if we're agreed that any member of the human species, Homo sapiens, is a human person, is endowed with basic moral worth, then that fetus is endowed with the same basic moral worth, which affords it protection in this country under the law by the Constitution of the United States, as well as many other laws and all the laws underneath therein, it is endowed with that legal protection. And so it doesn't matter if somebody's right. I mean, like, I know it sounds coarse because you just say, well, how can you say something? Listen, I was somebody who used to argue for years and years and years. I argued. But I'd still probably concede. I'd probably be like Donald Trump in this, again, from the neutral political sense. I can understand a politician going, yeah, I'm going to concede the rape thing. Because if we conceded rape, we would eliminate 99% of abortions. Because guess what? The vast, vast majority of abortions are not rape victims. Okay? So I think it would be a huge win for the pro-life movement if we conceded the rape issue. And I would do it purely for that reason, because I'd be saving hundreds of thousands or millions of lives a year. Doesn't mean I agree with it. It's not morally right. I would then continue the fight to eliminate those abortions or convince those women that those abortions were wrong, right? And that they have other options and that we can get them through that with social services. But yeah, I would take that. I would legally, if that was the legal obstacle from the left, well, we can't illegalize abortions because of rape, which is obviously not their argument. Because if it was, then bada bing, bada boom, we'd have it, right? Because that'd be a huge win for the pro-life movement. But yeah, I'd do that. Absolutely. Politically, from it doesn't mean I think it's right. He probably doesn't even think it's right. Trump, I don't know. But I would do it as a politician because the vast, vast majority, 99+% of abortions have nothing to do with rape. They have nothing to do with ectopic pregnancies or some kind of other concerning health issue. They don't. It's much less than 1%. The vast, vast majority are just women who aren't married, who are poor, who are scared of having a pregnancy. Something I'm empathetic towards. I cannot possibly imagine the terror of being a single mother in an inner city who can't, pay rent and being pregnant. Okay. But there are other pathways out there. And just because that's the case doesn't give you necessarily moral justification to end a human life. It's murder. And the same goes, again, morally, logically, for rape. Even if you're raped, the evil of one person does not doesn't make it morally permissible to kill somebody. Just because somebody rapes doesn't give somebody else the right to murder. That's the philosophical argument. Now, again, there's nuances and subtleties in those debates, right? It's not like the mother really feels like she's killing a child, and that does make it different, right? There's clearly a distinction, at the very least, between murdering an infant outside the womb and killing a fetus which is smaller than the period in a sentence, right? At least in terms of feeling, at least in terms of our sensation, and that affects our reasoning. And that's a reasonable thing. But in principle, it's not different. It's the ending of a human life. Okay? So that's our problem here. All right.
Willing, you go life of the mother, rape, incest. I think most of them are there.
But should a fetus have
statement.
Constitutional rights, Mr.
Yes.
President?
Well, I don't know what he's saying, because Democrats don't want to see abortion in the 7th month. Okay, I speak to a lot of Democrats. They want a number. There is a number, and there's a number that's going to be agreed to. And Republicans should go out and say the following, because I think the Republicans speak very inarticulately about this subject. I watched some of them without the exceptions, et cetera, et cetera. I said, other than certain parts of the country, you're not going to win on this issue, but you will win on this issue when you come up with the right number of weeks, because Democrats don't want to be radical.
Okay. I think we'll stop here. And I'll do a part 2, analyze the rest of the interview, because I know I've already got probably a lot of material here. But let me just go ahead and finish with this statement. So Trump's claiming here that Republicans can't win being quote unquote hardline or too hard, and he's right to a certain extent. I mean, again, that's why I would say there's all kinds of political concessions a politician could give to the left on the abortion issue, which would save lives, and then you continue the fight. I mean, the problem with Republican thinking is to think, well, oh, once a law is established, here it is, it's written, in the stone tablet, it'll never be changed. That's not how Democrats work. And by the way, that's not how anybody works anymore. That's not how the world of this age, with all of our technology and all the corruption and all the lack of moral fiber, that's not how this world works. Okay, what happens is you make a concession, you get what you want in increments. Okay, if we could save a couple 100,000 lives a year, great. The next year, you bring the fight right back. You bring the fight right back. You don't stop. You don't go, oh, that's it. It's settled now. Abortion's not an issue. No, you keep fighting, right? So let's lay the short-term political battles aside for a second, because he is right. The problem is that the country now it's split, and I would say it's probably not even split. I think most people are in favor of abortion. Like close to 100% of the population is probably favorable to abortion, really, at some point, right? At any point in the term of pregnancy, and somebody somewhere in this country is going to be in favor of aborting that baby, right? And then there's going to be a small percentage of people who are maybe 10, 15%, maybe as high as 20%. Are hardline abortion is never excusable, right? There is no moral justification ever for killing an innocent child. So, in a certain sense, Trump is right. Republicans going out there and saying there are no exceptions to abortion, yada yada yada. It's not going to win a political fight, and he's right about that. And even I am one of those people who currently feels that there is likely not a strong argument that we ever have moral justification to end the life of an innocent human being. But if I was running for office, I'd be with him. I'd be like, yeah, we're not going to win. I'm not going to try and pass a law. I'm not going to put all my political chips on the abortion issue this year. Anyways, I'm going to do what I can to get what I can now, and then the next year I'm going to go back again. That's how it works to be in a political movement. The only other thing I'll say, though, where he's wrong is that, and this is what I keep talking about on my show, and conservatives that I speak to, and I write on my blog. The real battle is education. The real battle is education. It's time for Republicans and real conservatives to wake up and realize they lost this fight decades and decades and decades ago, probably before your mother was born. The progressive educational paideia was established in this country close to 150 years ago, at least 100 years ago, right? And so it's taken about a century for progressive education to really become the dominant worldview in this nation. That's how long it takes, but it's guaranteed once you control the educational apparatus of a nation. It was always the plan. Marxists wanted to do it again in the 50s. They came over and they said, hey, we're not going to take over from the outside in. We got to grab the educational institutions. We have to grab the media, which is an educational institution. And we have to control the narrative in education. That's what conservatives need to do now. There is a world in which the majority of Americans believe abortion is wrong. I know a lot of people think, oh, it could never happen, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not true. People believe what they're taught, largely. And something is true and something is wrong. I'm convinced of the truth that abortion is wrong. So if people like me educate a lot of children, they will win that fight. They will win that fight. That's why the LGBTQ movement is suddenly so popular, because the LGBTQ people have been teaching our children about LGBTQ philosophy. And so now the philosophy is pretty widespread. It's not an irreversible thing. Conservatives could once again take control of education in this country. And in 100 years, there is a conceivable, realizable vision of America where most people have reasonable views that abortion is wrong and that it shouldn't happen. So I would say in that sense, he's wrong. The real fight on abortion and on so many issues that we've just lost because we've lost our moral philosophy. Conservatives have lost their moral movement. They've lost the worldview that actually made the conservative movement. Now we're partnering with Andrew Tate. I mean, Andrew Tate is supposed to be some conservative figurehead. Get real. If that's not a wake-up call to the crisis happening in conservative politics, I don't know what is. So the reason we're losing on so many issues is because conservatives have forgotten how to wield the weapons that they've been wielding, for the most part, successfully against liberals for hundreds of years and against liberal philosophy. Classical philosophy, classical education, right moral thinking, training in logic and grammar, training in aesthetics. These are the sorts of things that were first challenged by liberal progressives and Marxist ideologues. And it was these were the first things that conservatives went, oh, that doesn't really matter. I mean, we're not gonna pay attention to whether or not kids are learning Latin in school when we have to fight the abortion fight. And so we let those things go down the stream. We let those things wash away. And here we are now, 100 years later, going, why can't we win the abortion fight? Well, because 100 years of children have forgotten how to think about morality, have forgotten how to do philosophy, have forgotten how to read, how to write well, how to think logically and critically about something. And they don't know their own history. They don't know the names of the people from their own culture and history. So we got to stop sacrificing what's important for what's urgent. And we've lost the abortion debate. I mean, the abortion debate is, in some sense, a lot stronger than many of these other issues. I mean, we've lost the LGBTQ issue for sure. So we need to win the education system back. We have to win that battle, as I'm always on about. So at any rate, that's it for today. I'll do a part 2 on this interview. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this first part, mostly about abortion. And I'll see you next time. Thanks. Hi, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please remember to give a like and subscribe to my channel. I come out with a weekly newsletter every week, always free for the first post, and where we talk about philosophy, economics, history, and culture. I try to be pretty even-handed and educational about my style. So if you like it, please share this video. Give it a little subscription bell thingy, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.